My name is Monk Rowe for the Phileas Jazz Archive, and what a gas to have Tom Bones Malone with me today. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I thought what we would do is list every gig you've ever played and every person you ever played with, and then 6 hours later, I'll ask my first question.
Well, I played with everybody except Frank Sinatra. And I got a call to play with him in Atlantic City from Joe Malone, his string contractor, concertmaster. And I already had another job. So I had to turn down Frank Sinatra. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Yeah. So my career went right downhill right there that day.
But that says something about your professionalism.
Well, you have to do things. You have to do the right thing.
Yeah.
A word gets around quickly in the business.
That sort of leads me to this question I thought I would ask. I don't know if you have an ego or not, but if you do, I wonder if you could set it aside for a moment. And I'm wondering why your calendar for decades has been so full and you've been so successful in the business. What is it about you that people keep calling?
Well, I try to do the right thing. I don't have a music degree. I have a degree in psychology. I'm more or less self-taught musician, but I play 16 instruments professionally. Right now, my current project is I'm doing a big band album at my house by myself. Typical song is, I'm not sure if I sent you any of the stuff, but typical song is two alto saxes, two tenor saxes, baritone sax, four trumpets, three trombones, bass trombone, bass piano drums. So
What do you start with?
started out on the violin when I was 5.
But I mean, with this recording you're working on, if you're doing a lot of these parts yourself, is that what you mean? You're playing them yourself?
I do all the parts myself. I lay down the drums and then the bass and then the piano, and then I start putting horn parts on one at a time. I have Pro Tools 11, and I have the Neumann U87 microphone, which is the best microphone ever built. If you ever see a video of some famous singer, you'll notice that they have a Neumann U87 microphone hanging down from the microphone hanger.
I could just picture when you get into the ensemble stuff and like, yeah, that second alto player, man, he's not in tune in that section. And oops, that's me.
Well, I played one instrument or another with somebody in my career. I was tenor sax soloist with Frank Zappa. I was a trumpet player with Blood, Sweat, and Tears with Lou Soloff, 1973. I played jazz tuba. I played on Howard Johnson's last 5 tuba recording. On and on and on.
I have some of those Howard Johnson records. They are a delight.
Oh, Howard Johnson was a dear friend of mine from early on in New York. My career started in New York. I called Bob Burgess, can I crash on your floor in New York? And I moved up from North Texas State, moved to New York. And Bob went back on the road with Woody Herman pretty soon after I got there. So I inherited this cheap apartment in New York City in Manhattan. A friend named Hannibal Marvin Peterson called me up one day, says, can I come up to New York and crash on your floor? Hannibal Marvin Peterson was a black soul singer and a jazz trumpet player at North Texas State, good friend of mine. So I said, sure, come on up. So he's crashing on my floor, and he immediately started working with Rahsaan Roland Kirk and Gil Evans. Rahsaan Roland Kirk was the guy who played 3 saxophones at the same time.
Yes, I saw him.
So one night, Hannibal says, I got 2 gigs tonight. So the gig with Gil Evans doesn't pay anything. You want to sub for me with Gil Evans? And I said, sure. So I went down there. I met all these people that changed the rest of my life. Howard Johnson, David Sanborn, Dave Bargeron, Lou Soloff, Bruce Ditmas, on and on and on. And so Howard Johnson and I hit it off because, I played tuba and a lot of instruments like he did. And he recommended me to, playing with Gil Evans that night. I started playing with Gil Evans for the last 15 years of Gil's life. toured all over the world with him. And Howard Johnson recommended me for the job at Saturday Night Live that started in 1975. Dave Sanborn, I played on Dave Sanborn's first demo and played on his first 3 albums, and on and on and on like that. I later was trumpet player with Blood, Sweat, and Tears in 1973 with Lou Soloff. Lou Soloff and I left the band at the end of 73 and went on to play with Gil Evans for the next 15 years.
Guess who I was speaking with an hour ago on the phone? Fred Lipsius.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. Oh, what a talented guy he is. Yep. Oh, he was the arranger for Blood, Sweat, and Tears in the early days before I was in the band. And then my good friend of 56 years, Lou Marini, took Fred's place when he left the band and went to be faculty at the Berklee School of Music.
Right. If I went back to my original question, why did these people call you back after, make referrals, say, oh, you want to do this now? I mean, after that first Gil Evans gig, is it as simple as that you were good and you were easy to get along with?
Well, as I mentioned before, I have a degree in psychology, and I've found that just be nice to everybody, regardless of whether you're a lawyer or an accountant or whatever your career is. Be nice to people, and it always pays off. I've worked with musicians that have difficult personalities, and they tend to be traded off for somebody else. I mean, if they can hire me or another guy that have similar professional skills, who are they going to call? They're going to call the nice guy, the guy that gets along with everybody. So that's what I tell when I lecture at colleges. Basically, what I do these days is headline jazz festivals, go to colleges, play with their band, lecture to the students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, because like all musicians who book gigs, you get a gig and sometimes then you have to put a band together and you look at your list. The best player may not be the one you call first, because the best player may have some baggage going on, and who needs that?
I agree with you 100%. I'm not saying that being a nice guy is going to get you gigs. You have to do the work. You have to be able to sight read. You have to be able to improvise. You have to be able to play in tune. You have to be able to play in time. There's all sorts of skills that we have to get. You have to get the skills, but when you have the skills and you treat people nicely, doors will open.
Do you recall the first time you put on headphones in a studio setting to record something and make a few dollars?
Wow. I started recording in Dallas when I was in college at North Texas State. Somehow somebody got my name, and I started going into Dallas twice a week to record on jingles with the top professionals there in town. And we would do 8 or 10 commercials during a 1-hour session. That means you don't have time to practice the part. You have to be able to read it perfectly the first time, or they'll throw you out to get somebody else for the next session.
Where did those reading skills come from?
I'm sorry?
Where did your reading skills come from?
Well, I started off learning music at home, but I really got them polished, my skill at sight reading polished at North Texas State. Mm-hmm. Every day, the 1 o'clock band. I played lead trombone in the 1 o'clock band at North Texas and lead trumpet in the 3 o'clock band. I auditioned on tenor sax one time for John Giordano, the sax teacher there. And he says, I went in an audition and he says, okay, get out of here. And I said, what do you mean? I played the part perfectly. And he says, I have 60 jazz saxophone majors here this semester. I only have 30 chairs. We only have 6 bands. He says, and you're already playing in 2 bands and you're not even a music major. So get out of here. I started off in college at University of Southern Mississippi as a music major. Now I had started transcribing music off of records when I was 13 at home. So I took a course called Music Theory 101. And I answered all the questions for the first couple of weeks. the teacher takes me out in the hall and he says, "You don't have to come to class anymore. You get an A."
Well, it
You
sounds
already
like,
know all this stuff.
to me, on my end, it sounds like your whole life has been like that. I'm sure that's not quite true, but I'm going to go back to the Dallas recording things. When you were doing those things, bam, 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 one after the other, do you recall absorbing the idea of writing horn parts? Listening, here's my horn part. How does it fit with the person next to me? And sort of storing that for later when you did it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I started arranging when I was 13. So I understood the harmonies and stuff. I went to a small school. Well, brief story of my life. My father was a U.S. Navy pilot, Pearl Harbor survivor. I was born in Honolulu, 1947. And I was a Navy brat until I was 11. And I'd started playing violin when I was 5. So I played with the Kitty Symphony in Honolulu. I played with the Kitty Symphony in Garden Grove, Orange County, California, Pensacola Youth Symphony, blah, blah, blah. My dad retired, bought a farm in the middle of South Mississippi, in the middle of nowhere. There was no youth symphony to play with. So I started playing tuba in the marching band, and then trombone, and then trumpet, and then started playing saxophone with the local rock and roll bands when I was 14. That was when my professional career started. But there was no jazz program in the school. I went to a school that went from 1 to 12, and they had a marching band that was grade 4 through 12. So the music was not very difficult, and they didn't have a jazz program. So when I was 15, I wrote my own arrangements, put my own 8-piece jazz band together, and we went to the State Stage Band Festival and won 3rd place. And I got a scholarship to the Stan Kenton Stage Band Camp, Indiana University, summer of '63. And I got to study arranging with Herb Pomeroy.
Wow.
So by the time I got to North Texas, that was my 3rd year of college. I'd already written extensive big band arrangements for the college band at University of Southern Mississippi. We went to the Mobile Jazz Festival in the spring of '67, and I met Lou Marini there. Oh. And I heard Lou Marini's charts. I heard him solo. Lou heard my charts, heard me solo, and he says, "Man, you should really transfer to North Texas." So I did. Oh. I was 19 years old. I went on the road with the Jimmy Dorsey Band, Lee Castle and the Jimmy Dorsey Band. I was the Tommy Dorsey. It was mostly the Dorsey Brothers library in the book. And so I saved up enough money to pay my tuition and first month's rent.
There's an anecdote in your bio, or this was an interview you did with somebody. I'm gonna read it for a moment. My first big time gig was playing lead trumpet with Brenda Lee at a club in Jackson, Mississippi. The gig was 6 nights a week. I always passed out after playing a big, long, high C in the middle of the show. I had to hitchhike back from and forth to Jackson every night. I was going to class every day in the morning. So every night from 2 to 6 a.m., I was waiting on the side of the road for a ride. The gig paid $16 per night. And I spent this time evaluating the music business.
Yes. My father told me, if you're going to hitchhike, wear a suit. So I had to wear a suit to the gig anyway. So, but nobody picked me up till the sun came up.
Wow. I mean, that's paying some dues. And I wonder, this is, it wasn't going to go here yet, but the current music student that now at the age you were then, how do they pay dues?
Well, the whole music scene, the professional music scene has drastically changed in New York and LA. I can tell you more about New York. When I got to New York in 1970, January 1970, every TV show had a big band. All 3 networks had over 100 musicians on staff getting a weekly check. That doesn't exist anymore. And I have to say that the Saturday Night Live band that we started in 1975 was the first non-big band network TV show. And from then on, every new network TV show followed our cue. instead of a big band, it was a rhythm and blues band with 4 or 5 horns like we had. We had the band with Lou Marini, Alan Rubin, Howard Johnson, Paul Schaefer. We kind of started a trend, and I guess it was the end of the big band era for the TV shows.
When you were writing for them and for bands with horns, a lot of times, it was like, let's say you had trumpet, tenor, and trombone. What is your voicing? You'd think, well, obviously, the trumpet's going to be on the top, and the tenor's going to go in the middle, and the trombone's on the bottom. But is that true?
Yes.
Or do you mess with that?
Well, no, I basically followed the cue standard rhythm and blues voicings. If you have an F7 chord, you have the trumpet on the F at the top. You have a 6 below, you have the tenor on the A, and you have the trombone on the E flat below that. And that's the standard voicing. And when you have a small horn section, the best voicing is unison. And when I say unison, it's really the trumpet and then the tenor and the trombone 1 octave lower. That's what I call a unison.
I get you.
And if you have a baritone sax, he's another octave down there.
Yeah.
And in the case of that F7 chord, the baritone sax has a low F.
Right. Okay.
And the trumpet could have depending on the, whether you want the horns to stick out or not, the trumpet could have a C instead of the F, especially if you have a baritone sax covering the F on the bottom. So it could be from the top down, C, A, E flat, and then F down on the bottom.
How do you learn that?
I listened carefully to Memphis Rhythm and Blues, Otis Redding.
The Memphis Horns.
The Memphis Horns, yes. All the artists that were produced at Stax Records.
Did you used to sit by a record player with 45s, etc., and what was the first thing you would do? Okay, I want to learn this song, or I need to learn this song. You put down the needle. What's the first thing that you find to help?
Chord progression.
And do you find that, did you have a keyboard there, or did you just hear it?
Well, when I first started, I used a keyboard. I was sort of picking out the notes, trying to figure out what's what. But for the last 30, 40 years, I don't need the keyboard anymore. There's only so many chords. There's only so many voicings. I've already got them in my brain. And I hate to brag and say I have perfect pitch, but I can listen to a symphony orchestra and I can write down the second clarinet part.
Wow.
One of my recent projects is that I arranged a pop symphony act for myself. It's a symphony orchestra with a rhythm section. And the concept is orchestral pop hits of the 20th century. Stuff like MacArthur Park, Unforgettable, Georgia on My Mind, Kashmir, Betcha by Golly Wow, Philadelphia Sound. Average listener doesn't realize, they just hear their song and they like it or don't like it. And but the average person doesn't really know whether their hit song that they like was recorded with an orchestra or not. But I do, and I tried to put this together, and I've done 4 concerts so far. The most successful one, I think, was a fundraiser at University of North Texas at the big Murchison Hall, big fundraiser. And so the after party, there's this slightly older, patron lady that comes up to me and says she'd enjoyed the music. And I said, thank you. Did you recognize any of the songs I played? She says, I knew the words to every song you played. I just basically play the melody on these male vocals.
How about that?
But that's the audience I'm trying to reach, because people are not showing up at the symphony to hear that Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Debussy, all that stuff. I love all that music. I play symphony gigs too, but not as much as jazz and rock gigs. So they have to do pop music in order to keep themselves financially sound.
Right. One more question about the early time. I'm wondering, as you learned these songs to play in an R&B band, etc., was there a moment where you realized, oh, This is another 12-bar blues.
Well, a lot of the pop music is 12-bar blues, especially at the beginning of what they call rock and roll.
Yeah.
And it goes on today. And I think rock and roll was an outgrowth of blues music. And I think blues music probably originated in the Delta and Mississippi. But as things progressed, as the music went to Detroit and went to Memphis, they started changing the rhythms. You know, the rock and roll rhythm somehow came into the picture.
I see that you even did Ringling Brothers Circus gigs. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We did in Fort Worth, we did 10 shows in 20 days. No, 20 shows in 10 days. Yes. And it was nonstop. I mean, it really took a lot of chops to play that gig. There was another guy sitting next to me that, you know, when I was tired, he would take over. But you know, it was a lot of playing. And once again, you had to play as fast as you could, and then the guy, it would just cut you off anywhere. You know, as soon as the elephant got up on his hind legs, that song was over, and you went on to something else. But it was nonstop until you had a little 10-minute break in the middle. It was a ridiculous job. But you learn, you know, you have to play every style of music because you never know what you're going to get called for.
Doesn't it go along with having the attitude like, I don't have to love this music, I just have to play it correctly?
Well, that's true. That is true. I don't have to love the artist that I'm performing for either, but I have to play the music accurately.
Did you ever get in a situation in a studio with horns where they didn't have parts for you?
Oh, I've done that many times. Yes.
And how does that
learn the
work?
parts by ear. Yes. Okay. Paul McCartney, Egypt Station, 2018. I was an honorary member of the Muscle Shoals Horns. I'd done a couple of gigs with the Muscle Shoals Horns in Muscle Shoals. The 40th anniversary of the Last Waltz movie, a movie that I was in. We did it in Muscle Shoals and with the Muscle Shoals Horns. And I presented at the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. I inducted the Muscle Shoals Horn section. So Charles Rose, the head of the section, he got called to do Paul McCartney in New York, do his album. And he didn't know what we were going to play. They didn't send him any music in advance, any charts, anything. They flew us out there and put us up at a hotel and said, we'll pick you up at 11 o'clock. We didn't know where the session was. So we show up, they pick us up at 11. We go to Henson's Studios. Used to be A&M Studios. Used to be Charlie Chaplin Studios. And Paul comes out and starts playing a song. They start playing the track, and he comes out into the studio where the horns are set up and starts playing a line on the guitar. I want the horns to play this line. So we listened carefully, and we copped the line and played it. He says, that's it. So we dropped it into the recording 4 or 5 times, and then we went on to the next song. And the second song, he says, turn up this keyboard part. Turns up the keyboard part. The keyboard playing a line. So I want you guys to play that line. So we listened by ear, copped that line, and we dropped it into the song 4 or 5 times. Song number 3, Paul comes out with his guitar. While they're playing the track, he plays this line on the guitar. We listened carefully, copped the line. He says, that's it. Okay, so we got the line now. He says, that's the notes are right, but it sounds too low. Baritone sax, change to something. So the baritone sax player puts down his baritone and picks up an alto sax, and we play it again. And then he says, well, the notes are right, but it still sounds too low. Somebody do something. So I put down the tenor sax and picked up the piccolo. That's it. So we dropped it into the song. We did 6 songs in 6 hours like that, including lunch. Paul bought us lunch. And by the way, he was the nicest guy. It wasn't like he was up here and I was down here. It was just like you and I talking. It was just a very wonderful person, besides being, you know, as great as he is in music. Obviously, the leader of the Beatles.
And you have to have the ear and the patience, lack of attitude to be successful at that.
Absolutely. You have to leave your ego at the door. If you go in to do a session for somebody, it's not about you. It's about the artist. It's about the arranger. It's about the producer. It's about the engineer. It's about getting your sound on the microphone properly, playing the right volume, setting up in the right location.
I'm thinking that your degree in psychology may even be a little more valuable than a degree in music.
Well, when you're dealing with musicians, degree in psychology certainly helps.
Speaking of that, have you been in sessions where there was like an ad person, commercial, an ad person and a producer, maybe one and the same, that made tempers flare somewhat?
There's always someone that can cause anxiety. Yes. And you never know what's going to happen in the studio. And so you can't, your ego, you have to be ironclad. You have to have a defense mechanism against anything that would ordinarily make you angry. You don't have time in a session to get angry. Oh, here's a story you might enjoy. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Christmas album. The 48-piece orchestra in the studio. And so we spent at least the first 2 hours just rehearsing and getting the mix correct, getting the sounds and everything correct. So then we started into the songs, and we had all the songs done except one. There were 3 songs we were recording. Okay, so now we have one more song to do, and we have about 15 minutes left in the session. And okay, Ave Maria. Oh, so the conductor counts it off, and we start into the song, and then there's the booth. They go, cut it off, and they call the conductor back into the conductor arranger. They call him back into the control room, and you see there's some commotion going on in there. Well, it turns out there are 2 different songs called Ave Maria.
Oh no!
And so he arranged the wrong Ave Maria. Okay, so now there's a lot of commotion in there. So they decide to record this version of Ave Maria. And Gladys Knight is in there, so they figure out what key she should do it in. So now there's 5 minutes left in the session. There's time for one take. And the conductor walks in and he says, Ave Maria, down a fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's the one that's on the record. Everybody transposed it instantaneously.
Wow. I'm speechless. If I play alto, so I'm pretty good at, up a minor third from concert, etc., or, tenor down. But that's really something. It reminds me of Frank West, who would play tenor parts on his alto when it basically because he was too lazy to pick up the other horn or whatever. He just did that.
Well, I can do that. I can read an alto part on tenor, vice versa, tenor part on alto. I can read a trumpet part on the trombone. I can read a baritone part. I can do that too. Being an arranger, I can read any horn part on any other. Yeah, just because I've been doing it so long.
What's your sweet spot for, let's say you're able to put a horn section together, there's a modest budget. What's the sweet spot for you as far as number of horns?
Depends on the style of music. A typical rock and roll session is trumpet, tenor, trombone, baritone. Now, Tower Power had 2 trumpets, 2 tenors, and baritone. But that 4-piece thing for rhythm and blues and rock and roll is pretty much standard.
There's a wide range.
I do sessions at my house where a client says, they send me the track and the vocal, and they say we need horns on this. So I'll arrange the horns and I'll put the horns on one at a time at my house. Email it back to them.
What do you get?
A new way of doing things.
What do you get do you get a recording and a lead sheet or what?
Sometimes I do it by ear. Sometimes I write out the parts.
Mm-hmm.
Just depends on the complexity. But once again, unison is always the strongest horn voicing when you have a small horn section. Jerry Hay is one of my horn arranging heroes. Michael Jackson, Earth, Wind and Fire, Brothers Johnson, Quincy Jones, Al Jarreau, particularly Al Jarreau, High Crime, that album. And once again, it's that horn unison with the the tenor and the trombone an octave below the trumpets. And sometimes he's got the trumpets up another octave, doubled up an octave. Sometimes he has 3 upper horn octaves going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it makes me think of a tune. See if you can name this tune. Speaking of unison horns.
That was the best big band session I ever played on. Late in the Evening by Paul Simon from the movie. What was the name of the movie? It's a soundtrack album. I did not get credit on the album, but it was the best big band I ever played with in New York. We played. It was arranged by Dave Grusin. One Trick Pony is the name of the movie.
That's right.
Late in the Evening is the name of the song. Okay, trumpets: John Faddis, Lou Solhoff, Alan Rubin, Randy Brecker. Saxes: George Young, Lou Marini, Michael Brecker, Eddie Daniels, Ronnie Kuber, baritone sax, rhythm section, Steve Gadd, Tony Levin on bass, Richard T on piano, Hugh McCracken on guitar. We did 16 takes in a 3-hour session. That's all we had is one chart to do.
But I bet you guys played it right the first time, though.
Yes, we did. All 16 were perfect takes.
I love that. That's like, that was perfect. Let's do it again.
And that was the best band I ever played in. Best big band that I ever played in. Trombones, well, myself and Jim Pugh, Dave Taylor, Barry Rogers, the guy that played in the group Dreams with the Brecker brothers. And he was the first Latin trombone player. He was the first salsa trombone player. Jewish kid from the Bronx, grew up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood. Before Barry Rogers, they only had saxophones and trumpets in salsa music. And suddenly Barry came on the scene and bang, it was all over. Now every salsa band has a trombone. And I played on all the salsa recordings in New York too. Fania Records, 1974, 75, 76. Wow, Willie Colon, Hector Lavoe, Ruben Blades, Johnny Pacheco, Mongo Santa Maria, LeBron Brothers, all those guys, Cheo Feliciano.
With that with that Paul Simon tune, who would have been responsible for assembling that all-star group of horn players?
To be honest with you, I can't remember who the contractor was.
Okay, but Paul Simon trusted some contractor, and was he the one that caused 16 takes?
Yes, he would. Well, he didn't like this and he didn't like that, and he's a very kind of picky guy. I'm not saying that he doesn't have the right to be picky. It's his music. It's his, So once again, it's not for me to criticize him. It's for me to make him happy, regardless of whether I think it sounds perfect or not. I'm not the producer. I'm not the artist. I'm not the arranger. I'm not the engineer. Yeah. So you just have to keep that attitude. And I could have played it 17 times. I just liked playing with that band. Yeah. That's the only chart we had. Okay, fine. Bang. Let's do another take.
Was everybody playing at the same time?
Yes. Yes. A lot of, well, I'll say most studio recordings, they record the rhythm section first, and then they record the horns, and then they record the strings, they separately. And, it's for many reasons, especially including leakage. But, you concentrate on the rhythm, you get that right. Concentrate on the horns, get that right. Concentrate on the strings, get that right. And, vocals are always separate too. Sometimes they put the vocal on first because you need to see how the parts interact with the vocal. But sometimes they, once the arrangement's laid out, sometimes they do that later. Or a lot of times they'll put down a scratch vocal to work with, and then they'll do a final vocal later where they'll get real picky and, take their time with it. And
did you know Joe Wilder?
Of course. Oh, yeah. What a phenomenal musician and a nice guy.
Indeed. Oh. He told me that he didn't mention names, but he said when the studio scene was so happening that guys would get a little overzealous and take us, they had a 10-1, and then they would book a 1-4, knowing that either they were going to have to get out of something early or arrive late.
Well, we did it frequently, and during this the 70s and 80s, I basically played Saturday Night Live on the weekend, and I did recording sessions all during the week. And I was in a group of people who were in demand. So people like Alan Rubin, Marvin Stamm, Lou Marini, George Young, Brucker Brothers. We would book stuff, we'd book a jingle 1 to 2 and another jingle 2 to 3. And we would usually get it done early because we knew we had another session. And that's why they booked us. They knew that we weren't going to waste their time. But sometimes, for whatever reason, the rhythm would go over time, and then we would go in late, and we'd show up. But we showed up, if we showed up 10 minutes late for the other session, all the studios were in the same neighborhood, so everything was in walking distance. So if we showed up 10 minutes late, we all showed up together, and we got the job done. So even though that happened occasionally, I got into the business in New York. I met Bill Watchers early on, and he would send me into sub for him to cover. I'd show up and I'd say, Bill Watchers will be here in 10 minutes, and I'd play until he got there. And that's the way I established myself in the business. Yeah. Bill Watchers and I became friends. I was playing trombone with a group called Eclipse. It was an up and coming rock band with original music. And I was a trombone player, and Bill wanted to be in the band. He wanted to get into the rock and roll scene, as opposed to the jazz scene. So I switched over to electric bass, and he became the trombone player in the group. Then I started playing with a group called 10 Wheel Drive, 3 trumpets, trombone, and Barry sax. I was a trombone player. Bill's good friend Danny Stiles was the lead trumpet player in the band. So Bill wanted to be in the band, so I switched over to trumpet, and he became the trombone player. So we, you help friends out in the business, and it always pays off one way or the other.
Yeah.
And Bill got me in the business. Bill moved to LA in 1975, but 6-7 years later, I remember getting a call from a guy, and I said, a guy I didn't know. I said, where'd you get my name? Bill Watchers recommended you 6-7 years ago. So just pays off to be nice to everybody, whatever that means.
You just said something that I wanted to follow up on. The group of people that I graduated with, we all had aspirations to maybe get in a big band. Oh my God, if we could get in Buddy Rich's big band. Most of them took the fallback position and became public school teachers, which is an honorable, position. But for those of you in that group that had aspirations to be jazz musicians, to have a band, to record for Blue Note, like your musical heroes did. But now you're playing 2, 3, 4 sessions a day. And I wonder if that ever got to be like, wow, what happened? This is not what I anticipated.
Well, you make plans in your life based on what's going on around you at the time, but everything changes, and you have to be willing to change with the style of music. I know when I first got to New York, 1970, the studio recording scene was in a transition from big band and jazz to rock and roll. And there were a lot of guys like bass players, drummers. Oh, this rock and roll thing's never going to catch on. I don't want to play that junk. They use a different word. And and those guys were out of the business overnight. And there were other guys like, let's say, upright jazz bass player, listen to the rock and roll stuff, says, I can do that. I can play electric bass. I can play that rock and roll stuff. And these people continue to be busy players, drummers, bass players, guitar players. So you have to roll with the punches. You have to change with what's going on. You have to adapt your music skills. I mean, it's going to be still going to be the same 12 notes.
And how
But you
did,
have to be able to play. You have to be able to play jazz. You have to play Latin. You have to classical. You have to play uh, 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 whatever style of music. You just have to play it.
I
I
would
played on
think,
all the pop, Hasidic pop recordings too in Brooklyn.
oh my,
Mordecai Ben David, Avram Fried, all those guys, Yedel, all of them. They dress up like the Blues Brothers too.
yes, I noticed that. I just read, I thought it was pretty hip that um, the way that thing came together. And Dan Aykroyd, your first assignment, if this is true, said, write an arrangement, some horn parts for Rocket 88.
Well, here's the story. I was the arranger for Saturday Night Live from 1975 to 1985. And spring of 1978, the music director asked me to meet with John and Danny in John's office at 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon. And it's just the three of us. So they were talking about, they're developing these characters. These guys that wore sunglasses day and night, and they were ne'er-do-well blues musicians in Chicago. So I wrote an arrangement of Rocket 88 by James Cotton. We did it for Lorne Michaels, the producer, after I rehearsed the Saturday Night Live band on my chart. Turned us down. Didn't make the show. Week number 2, John and Danny are still hot on this idea of the Blues Brothers. So I wrote an arrangement of a song called Hey Bartender. I rehearsed the band. We did it for Lorne Michaels, the producer. Lorne says, frankly, I don't see anything funny about the Blues Brothers. Week number 2, shot us down. So the next week, John and Danny gave up on the Blues Brothers. If Lorne doesn't like it, if we're not getting on the show, we're wasting our time. Couldn't argue. So the third week, Lorne comes out of read through 3:15 Wednesday afternoon, and he says, the show's 3 minutes short. What are we going to do? He used the H word in there somewhere. And John and Danny jumped on him and said, Lorne, the Blues Brothers. So Lorne said, we have nothing worthwhile to put in those 3 minutes. You guys might as well make fools of yourselves. He put us on the show. And he put us at the end of the show so that if, in case the show ran long, you know, he could cut us. But the show did not run long. We got on the show, and I suppose the rest is history in a certain sense of the word.
Did you think in the initial stages that it was supposed to be funny? Was that the intention? That it was funny?
I was not in charge of what they did as characters on the stage. I
Mhm.
was only asked to write music arrangements, and I tried to make sure that the band played the music, you know, played those correctly, in the right style and the right feel. And it wasn't up to me whether they were funny or not.
Yeah, it wasn't Spike Jones funny. It was, if it was going to be funny, it was going to be those two guys.
Exactly. Yeah. We just backed up these guys, and that was my whole career at Saturday Night Live for 10 years. I was the arranger for 10 years. I was also the music director from 81 to 85. You know, Eddie Murphy, Joe Piscopo, Martin Short, Billy Crystal era. I wrote the music to Hot Tub.
Oh,
I didn't write the lyrics, but I wrote Hot Tub, and I produced the pre-record for that scene.
were you writing with score paper and pencil during this time?
I did. I started out with score paper, and I had a copyist. I'd take the stuff at like 11 or 12 at night, take it to the copyist up on the Upper West Side, and he would show up in the morning at the show with the parts copied out professionally. Now ever since computer notation software has come out, I do it all in there, and it speeds up the process. You know, cutting and pasting. It's so much faster. And I don't use the copyist anymore. I can lay out the parts quite rapidly and print them out, and or email them out, and that's the way they do it. I use a software called Overture. Most people use Sibelius or Finale,
Right.
but I helped Overture. I was a beta tester for Overture when they were developing the software, and I was using it on the TV shows. So I would find mistakes in the software, send it to the company. They would send me a beta version, and 10 or 12 beta versions later, they would release a new version to the general public for sale. But so I got a very inside view on how this stuff works.
That's cool, because I know Finale has some things that are quite annoying. but to be in on the development of it, you're not going to get annoyances when you get the final product.
Well, as far as I know, Finale is the more of the standard for the publishing business. And although Sibelius has some advantages too, and I have both of those softwares, but there's always a deadline when I do an arrangement. So I just always go back to Overture because I'm lightning fast on that. One night I was an arranger for the David Letterman Show for 22 years. One night we did, our basic schedule was we did the show from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. and then it was broadcast at 11:30. Anyway, one night the show's over around 5:30, 5:35. I go upstairs, I'm changing clothes. I'm almost out of the building and can you meet with Paul in Paul's dressing room? Okay, so Paul has 2 CDs in his hand. He says, Renee Fleming's going to do the top 10 tomorrow. We need 13 opera excerpts by 11 in the morning. And here's the 13 opera excerpts. He gives me a CD. And the other CD, this is Renee Fleming's most recent recording album product. Figure out what keys you should sing them in. Wow. You're supposed to have a rehearsal with the piano and the vocalist before you do this. Anyway, so that part was left out. And then Paul looks at me with a panicked look on his face and he says, Bones, how are we going to pull this off? I said, I'll play flute. Aaron, our sax player, will play oboe. We'll hire a French horn. We'll hire a clarinet. And you'll play the string parts on the string synthesizer. There's your opera. We've all heard opera. We know we can. So stayed up all night, did all the stuff. And all night when I was staying up, I was thinking to myself, Renee Fleming is going to be a real diva. She's going to be difficult. Turns out to be exactly the opposite. She had a great sense of humor, very easy to work with, very just nicest person ever. And I had one of the songs in the wrong key. I brought my laptop with me, quickly transposed all the parts, printed it out in Paul's office next door. 5 minutes later, there it is. And it's on YouTube. Renee Fleming, David Letterman, top 10.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, they changed all the, the writers changed all the original lyrics to funny lyrics. And she was delightful.
Wow. So
you never know. I was an arranger for a show called, a TV special called The 40th Anniversary of Atlantic Records. It was at it was at the Garden, Madison Square Garden. Giant audience. And it was a 14.5-hour concert. Started at 10 in the morning, went till 2:30 in the morning. Closing act was Led Zeppelin, who had not performed for 6 years. Everybody in the history of Atlantic Records was there. I had done 30 arrangements before the show. And so we got there and we played with the first act at 10 o'clock, went back to the dressing room. And then Ahmet Ertegun comes in the dressing room and he says, no concert of Atlantic Records would be complete without Bobby Darin being represented. So I said, Mac the Knife? Tim from the Manhattan Transfer is sitting next to me. He says, I know the song. So I had brought score paper with me. This is before computers. I started filling out the score. I started writing the chart. And they called my copyist to come in and copy the parts. And we walked on stage and sight read the song. And he sang the song, just bang, just like that.
Did you
walking down the hall and I run into Trevor Rabin, the group Yes. You guys on the show? Yeah. What song are you doing? Owner of a Lonely Heart. I said, wouldn't it be great if you had real horns playing that horn licks in the middle of the song? He's like, yeah, can we do that? I knew the parts. I had played and recorded with James Brown. So, I knew those were lifted right out of one of his records. So I wrote out the parts and the horn section went on and sight read them on live TV. The horn section was Alan Rubin, Lou Marini, Tom Scott, and myself. So, boom. So I wrote 2 arrangements after the show started. Another time, the Letterman Show, they sent a camera down to 48th Street and they could go in with a remote camera. They go into Sandmatch Music. Here's a kid with a trumpet case over his shoulder in the store. And they said, you want to sit in with the Letterman band? And the kid looks at the camera and says, when? I said, right now. The kid ran off. He ran away. He ran off ran out of the store onto the street. Then they found another kid in there with a tenor sax over his shoulder. You want to sit in with the Letterman Show? When? Right now. Kid ran away, ran out on the street. So now there's a girl behind the counter. You know, do you play an instrument? Yes. What do you play? Alto sax. You want to sit in with the Letterman? Do you have your horn with you? Yeah, it's right here. You want to sit in with the Letterman band? When? Right now. Sure. So the camera's following her up Broadway to 52nd Street to the studio. And she comes up on the stage and Paul says, well, what songs do you know? She says, well, I don't know any songs by ear, but if you can write them out for me, I can play it. So say, okay, well, isn't she lovely? Tom, what key should you play it in? Bang, write her apart. Bang, 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 write her out apart. Handed it to her. Just as soon as I handed it to her, Paul counts off the song.
Oh.
And we did the whole show like that. What song do you know? The rhythm section of that band knew everything. So we just basically, I just wrote out songs for her that they knew. And that was the whole show.
Yeah, I've often wondered about that. You have everyone from Sonny and Cher to Renee Fleming on the show, and there's got to be some very hip musicians who not only can play anything, but can hear anything and play in the correct style and so forth.
Yes. Well, we had a remarkable rhythm section on that show. Anton Fig on drums, so Will Lee on bass, and the guys had been everywhere, played everything, and a lot of times artists would come on. Well, hey, I played on the original record. Yeah, I know the part. So, but that's one of the necessary skills for a TV musician, because you never know who they're going to put on there. Snoop. I wrote horn charts for Snoop Dogg one time. We did that song called "Get the Funk Out of My Face," written by Quincy Jones, and Quincy Jones is sitting in the chair next to Dave. That was a thrill for me. James Brown sat in with the band for a whole show one night. That was Jimmy Smith, famous organ player, sat in with us the whole. We did "Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf." I got to write out some parts. We got to back up so many cool people. Oh my God!
What happens to all this music that you've written?
A lot of it's stuff still in my computer.
Okay.
They threw out giant piles of music at the Letterman show when the show ended. I grabbed up a few, but
how do you charge for your arranging?
Oh, well, there's a formula. The Union Book has a way. It's by the measure or the score page or something. There's a way of breaking it down, so it's all mathematical.
Is the further broken down, like there's 12 voices here as opposed to 4, etc.?
Well, if you it depends on the number of staves on the score and the number of bars or number of score pages or something like that. I just worked out a deal with Schaefer where it was everything was the same price, and then I just used the same formula. It was by the bar is what I do, so I just multiplied by the bar formula, and that was the way I billed Schaefer in the Letterman Show.
And by the way, I stayed up all night doing this one, so do I get a tip?
Not one penny extra.
No kidding.
No. I got a substantial check for doing Renee Fleming.
Yeah. Was Gil Evans?
And I got a substantial check for doing the Atlantic Records 40th, because not only did they do the 14.5-hour live cable show, but the CBS did a 2-hour special that they edited out of there. So I got 2 sizable checks.
Nice. And do you still get some sizable checks that show up in your mailbox that you have to figure out where they came from?
Well, you pick them up at the Union, so you know exactly where they came from. Yeah. While I was at the Letterman Show, the Dean of Music at the North Texas State came up to New York and took me out to lunch, and they needed somebody to be the director of the 1 o'clock lab band. So I asked him how much it paid, and he told me how much it paid, and I was making more than 3 times that much at the Letterman Show. So because I was playing 7 instruments on a daily basis, and arranging, so I had to turn it down. I had on the bandstand I had baritone sax, bass trombone, trumpet, flugelhorn, piccolo trumpet, tenor sax, alto sax, flute, piccolo, and alto flute on the bandstand every day. So you get paid a little extra when you play more than one instrument.
You need a roadie. Have you ever turned down any work, either because financially it didn't work for you, or it just was out of your realm of feeling you could do a good job with it?
I never turned down any for the last reason. I never turned down anything for that reason. If somebody wanted me to go out of town and didn't offer me enough money, I would turn it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a quote from you. I'm looking at my wall. It says, "If you're called to do a job you don't really want to do, ask for more money. You can market yourself as either a Pinto or a Mercedes."
Well, that's true. Uh, yeah, if it's a job you really, really don't want to do, just ask for more money, and that way you're not really turning it down. You're not technically turning it down. Then it reverses the psychology. Now they're the one that's turning you down. The employer
I see.
turns it completely around.
Let's talk about Gil Evans a little more. I was having a reading something and trying to write something about the major innovators in jazz history and the fact that the majority of them are African American. So then I went like, well, who's the first white um, musician that seemed to make a significant contribution to changing jazz? And I thought of Gil Evans. I thought of Bix, but I thought of Gil Evans as a writer. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. Yes, we're talking about Porgy and Bess, Miles Ahead, Sketches in Spain, particularly Sketches in Spain. Gil Evans arranging for Miles Davis. Now, I did the 1983 Miles and Gil tour of Japan, and I also did played on the last recording with Miles Davis and Quincy Jones, Montreux, Switzerland, 1991. Miles passed away about 3 weeks later. But Miles was certainly a big influence, and Gil Evans was my musical father for his last 15 years. We among other things, we played every Monday night at Sweet Basil for 8 years, and we cranked out 2 or 3 albums there that sold very well in Japan. Gil had a different way of voicing things. Like jazz musicians and big band musicians have a standard way of voicing things, where you have if you have a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, you leave out the root or the fifth in the upper voicings. Gil Evans had a different way of voicing things. He always had all 3 of the 1, 3, and 5 of the chord in the upper harmony, plus another note that was rarely the 7th. Oh. He would put an extra note in there. This is, in his own words, he said, it's like a barbershop quartet with 1 extra note. And the extra note was always a half step away from one of the primary notes of the triad. Example, okay, major chord, major triad, C, G, and E, he'd throw an A flat in there. In other words, he'd have a +5 and a regular 5 at the same time next to each other.
Right, in the same octave.
Right next to each other.
Mm.
Yeah, C, A flat, G, E, like that. And a minor chord, he would have he frequently have one of his let's say, okay, A minor, G, E, B, B flat. In other words, you had a +11 right next to the 5th. That was a typical voicing of Gil Evans. And if you listen carefully to those charts, you'll hear those voicings in there.
Did the chord symbols for the keyboard or guitar indicate those voicings?
Yes.
So they knew what was going on.
Yeah, his chord symbols were very very exacting in his charts. And I wrote an album shortly after Gil died. I wrote an album called a small group album with 4 horns. Standards of Living is the name of it, and it was those voicings. I wanted to keep part of Gil alive, so I wrote a whole bunch of jazz standards with the Gil Evans voicings in them. And it was John Faddis, Alex Foster, Bill Evans, the tenor player, myself on the trombone, Danny Gottlieb, Mark Egan, and Gil Goldstein. That was the band.
Yeah. It's like you've cloned yourself to be in so many places at seemingly in the same time.
Well, the more versatile you are, the more gigs you're going to get.
Well, then you just answered my next question was that, you know, your neighbor's son takes you aside and go, I'd really like to have some advice. I'd like to do what you did. I'd like to be a full-time musician. And they're like 17. Do you have anything to say to them, considering how much the business has changed?
Well, when I started practicing when I was around 13. I was practicing 4 or 5 hours a day, all the way through high school. I was living on a farm in the middle of nowhere in South Mississippi, and I didn't want to stay on the farm and milk cows, haul hay, picking corn. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't for me. You know, farming is an honorable profession, but I practiced because I heard this record by Irby Green, and I wanted to move to New York and be a professional musician. So I practiced. My mother would say, Tommy, it's time to go to sleep now. It's time to stop playing. So I might stay up a little later and noodle around on the piano trying to figure out what the notes were on a record. But you know, you got to do the work. You got to really practice. And also the professional opportunities are not there for a young musician. It's not, New York is not like it was when I moved there in 1970. They don't have all these, the job opportunities are shrinking. It's not getting better. For what I do in New York, the recording business is almost not there. All the professional musicians I used to do studio work with are doing Broadway shows. And that wasn't for me to play exactly the same music 8 times a week with no improvisation. That's not why I got into the business. You know, basically what I do is headline jazz festivals and go out and work with kids and play my own charts. And
so that's one thing that you might have turned down for musical reasons to get on, you know, get in Phantom of the Opera pit and all your financial worries are taken care of.
I subbed down there a couple of nights, actually playing bass trombone, and the music was wonderful. Oh my goodness, yes. But you know, going back to the question you asked me earlier in the interview about turning down jobs, yeah, I had the opportunity to do Broadway shows, and I never did because I just knew it wasn't for me. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, all my friends were playing Broadway shows, and they're paying their rent, supporting their families, and you know, it's honorable. And so, some of the new shows are quite interesting. You know, the Ain't Too Proud about the Temptations. And I was on the road with the Temptations in 1969. Yeah, it was the Supremes and the Temptations, the original guy. And there's a Michael Jackson Broadway show too.
Yeah.
You know, I always loved his music. So there's a lot of, you know, there's good stuff going on. So my friend Ross Konikoff played trumpet on Cats for 20 years. So, you know, there's all kinds, you know, all kinds of different music, all kinds of different professional opportunities.
Speaking of different,
they're young musicians that come out of college that come to New York, and that's what they want to do is play a Broadway show. A lot of them are woodwind players that learned to play a lot of different instruments because they knew that was a requirement to play on Broadway.
Yeah. You have anything to offer up about Frank Zappa?
Oh, Frank Zappa was a unique individual. His viewpoint on the world was different than anybody I ever knew. You know, you and I might look out on the street and just see, oh, well, what's going on? There's cars, and Frank would see something and find humor in it. Example, we were on the road with a 10-piece Mothers of Invention. It's December 1972. We're in Philadelphia. We're playing at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. There's about 8 inches of snow on the ground. We get off the bus, and right there by the sidewalk, there's a fire hydrant that has little yellow streaks around it. And so during the sound check, Frank wrote, "Don't eat the yellow snow." He was a piece of work, Frank. one time he had when I was playing with him, I moved out to LA to play with him. One time he had a 48-hour party at his house, and you could come and go as you wanted during the 48 hours. And 1972, it's before video cassette or DVD, but you could rent any movie in Hollywood, 8mm, 16mm, 35mm. So you had this giant, big, empty basement. It had purple carpet and orange walls. And he had a projection booth in the corner with a 16mm projector. So he rented 48 hours worth of movies. Freaks, Godzilla, Chainsaw, all the weirdest movies he could find. And he would sit there and drink coffee and make snide comments about the movies. Once again, his viewpoint on all this stuff was unique. And he would make you laugh even in the most serious part of a movie. And came by there with my girlfriend at 2 a.m. Party's going on. Stayed till 4.
Did he write out all those very intricate melodies?
Everything was written out. He had everything was written out. I got the job with Frank by playing the tuba over the telephone. He was looking for a tuba player for the Grand Wazoo. And so I played the tuba over the telephone, went over to his house the next day, and he says, Sal Marquez tells me you play other instruments besides the tuba. And I said, yeah. So he said, well, give me a list. And so I put down bass trombone, trumpet, flugelhorn, piccolo trumpet, tenor sax, flute, and piccolo. And I showed up for rehearsal 2 weeks later, and he had rearranged all his music so I had a part for every instrument. Yeah.
Oh.
Frank was a great influence on my life. And I did the 20-piece tour. I did the 12-piece tour, Mothers of Invention. I did the 10-piece tour. Then he cut down the band to 6 pieces. And he says, we're only going to have one horn on the next tour. And he says, it's going to be Bruce Fowler. I said, cool. He says, Bruce tells me he'll play electric bass. I said, yeah. He said, well, you want to audition? I said, sure. I went over to his house one day, and I remember Ralph Humphreys was there, just passed away last week, sadly. And George Duke was there playing keyboards. And so I auditioned on electric bass, thought I sounded pretty good. A couple of weeks go by, nothing. Call up Frank, leave a message on his phone. Hey, Frank, it's Tom. Let me know what's going on. Another week goes by, nothing. I get a call from Blood, Sweat, and Tears in New York. Chuck Winfield's leaving the band. We need a trumpet player. Can you be in New York tomorrow? I said, sure. So I gave away my car, checked all my stuff on the plane. My girlfriend, who later became my wife, stayed for a day or two to pack up stuff and come out later. And Frank called to say I had the job playing bass with him. The next day after I left, he calls to say I had the job playing with George Duke, Jean-Luc Ponty on the tour in '73, 3 tours of Europe and a tour of Japan for double the money that Blood, Sweat, and Tears was paying me. But I was gone. And I recommended Tom Fowler, who was Bruce Fowler's brother, Frank, electric bass player. Frank loved him, played with Frank for several years. I covered my tracks. That's what you do. If you turn down a job, you always recommend somebody who is competent. And that way that's just the way the business is. Yeah. That way you save face,
Wow.
Just the way it's done.
This has really been a fascinating conversation. I think we could probably do a part 2 and a part 3. And
yes, we could.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should, but I want to close with a question about, I read about the plastic military figures and 1812 overture. Is that ringing a bell?
Well, I know the 1812 overture.
Yes. Well, it says in your own hand or in an interview that when you were a little kid, your parents bought their first record player.
Yes. I was living in Hawaii at the time. I was 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
And I heard all this music, and we used to play war. My dad was a military officer. We used to play war. My brother and I used to play war, and my brother got a violin, and because of listening to that music, the violins. I can still remember all that music, and so my brother got a violin, and The only reason I wanted a violin is because, hey, my brother's got one. I want one too. You know, that's what childhood. So I got my own violin. I guess he got one when he was 6. He's 2 years older than me. So by the time he was 7, I was 5. My parents bought me a violin, and I still have it. It's a 1/16. It almost looks like a toy violin or something. I want to get it restrung and fixed up, put it on the wall.
Nice. Well, it said something about toy soldiers. You'd play war with the toy soldiers to.
Yes, I had those little miniature. I'm trying to. Were they Mattel? I'm trying to remember little toy soldiers, and we used to play with my brother and I used to play with them on the floor.
Yeah, me
While
too.
we were playing that music. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was indeed about war. That music was about war.
Indeed.
Yeah, like a trumpet stuff and lots of minor key stuff, and they, some orchestras even today, if they do an outdoor concert, they'll bring the cannons. Yeah, for the finale part.
I hope those guys get hazardous duty pay. Oh my. Well, thank you very much for this enlightening hour, and I'll let you get back to your whatever arranging thing is. By the way, when you have an arrangement assignment, before you sit down, does something start to rattle around in your head, even before, like, you're sitting with your computer or something?
Oh, of course. If I have a clue as to what I'm going to do, if I usually listen to the music, and then all kinds of ideas come into my mind, and I just when I get in front of the computer, I just filter through those ideas. But a lot of stuff I do is for rock stuff with vocals on them. So basically, you either fill in the slots. Now, okay, slots. What does it mean by that? Like the singer sings a passage, and there's a little pause before they sing another lyric. So you basically put a little lick in there, and that's usually where the unison comes in. And there are other parts of the song where you might have a subtle chord backing them up, like whole notes, while they're actually singing on top of you. But the idea is you don't conflict with the vocal, because the vocal is the most important thing. If I'm just putting horn parts on, I just make sure that they occur in their own space and don't interfere with the vocal. Because I'm just the frosting on the cake. That's all.
Okay. I've sometimes told students, if they want to get fired from a band, they're a horn player and they want to get fired, just start playing when the singer is singing.
Oh, easily. Yeah. Or play too loud. Bang. Next.
All right.
Where's the next trombone player?
Well, thank you for the frosting on the cake, Tom.
It's my pleasure to talk with you. Call me up anytime.
All right.
We'll do it again. We can talk for days.
Okay, I'll pause this and then we'll say goodbye.
My pleasure.